both new media and the Faculty of Management. And I think it's absolutely exciting that our two faculties are working together like this. We're so honored to have you here today. David Gouget, who is Head of Marketing and Communications at WETA Digital. I had more to say about your background. I'm going to do it very briefly because we want to get moving here. But David did begin his career in advertising and has worked with some of the top advertising agencies like Young & Rubicam. He also, prior to WETA Digital, was in Film and Games Senior Industry Marketing Manager, at Autodesk, and he continues to do advising in this area. So we're very honored to have him. Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity. This environment sort of isn't quite as conducive to question and answer in sort of an informal setting. There's a stage and all this stuff, but this is really intended to be very sort of open, so feel free to have questions anywhere along the way. This will be a little more free-form than normal because I don't have any of my presenter notes, so we're just going to go with what's on the slide and what I remember from the presentation. It'll be awesome. First of all, thanks for coming. The topic is kind of an interesting one, particularly as it kind of bridges both of the faculties as well. They originally asked if I could present to you guys about storytelling and branding and how that applies to WETA Digital in particular. So what I'm going to sort of walk you through is a little bit of the approach in terms of how storytelling is important for our business and how that relates to brand, and a little bit of the history of WETA Digital and sort of what we're doing now and how the company started and some of the challenges. I'll also spend a little bit of time talking about the business itself in terms of how a visual effects company runs and how it works and what type of business it is and what challenges it has, because I think a lot of times people might have a general sense of what a visual effects company does and how they run, and in many cases that's not entirely true, which is a good intro to the slide. Most of this presentation is really around perception and differing perceptions. This is a drawing that my son did a couple years ago. This is my son skiing, my daughter skiing in pink. My daughter was 3 at the time this drawing was done. She does not have those skills, but my son was very imaginative. The other thing that I really liked about this picture was me playing hockey. You'll notice me out in front of the net there. I've always viewed myself as having brown hair with a little bit of gray. My son clearly differs. He sees it as gray. And so that perception is a very important thing. It's what drives everything. Whatever you sort of perceive and how you interact with the world is not the same way as everybody else. And that's an important thing when you think about companies and you think about brands and how you're representing yourself or your work just as an individual. The WETA group, I'll give you a little bit of background here. Actually, when people say WETA, in most cases they're talking about the general collection of companies that was started by Peter Jackson in New Zealand. And the bigger companies are WETA Workshop and WETA Digital. WETA Workshop handles a lot of the practical effects, props, armor, and special effects, more sort of traditional effects, physical things. WETA Digital is all digital effects. We try to reference the real world and physical items as much as possible, but the work that's generated is all digital. The other companies represented here, WETA Limited, or the one that says WETA NZ, actually will technically disappear in a month and will be folded into WETA Workshop, which I just found out this morning. It's our collectibles business, and that is an important part of our brand and our representation. The collectibles business really came out of the artists in the workshop, Dave Drummond being one of us, building and crafting things, not only for film projects, but also that then could be sold, because there was such an appetite for fans and people to get access to these really high-end props and toys and things that collectibles, that we started building them, and all of them sort of still continue to come out of the workshop. And it's an expanding line, and if you come and visit us at Comic-Con or a sort of larger presence, you'll almost certainly see those groups there. The other two here are Park Road Post, which is post-production, essentially anything that happens after the visual effects, so it's sound, editing, final color, and the output of the film itself for distribution. And the one right in the middle is Wingnut Films, and Wingnut Films is actually Peter's company, and that is the company this is essentially what we do. We do CG characters, 3 of which are represented here. These are all from Desolation of Smog. I thought I would add some current stuff in there. Azog up in the top right, a spider, and then his son Gold. Actually, everything in all 3 of these shots is digital. There is nothing, although you largely can't see them because of the glare. Another thing we do is effects, what we call FX, which is anything that is sort of natural phenomenon or fantasy phenomenon. So this could be sparkles and things like that from spaceships. It's also water and fire. We did a large amount of effects work in the Desolation of Smog. How many of you actually have seen the film? Most. Okay. The barrel escape sequence is one that always comes up, and it was one that was very prevalent in old press. Somebody wanted to know. The barrel escape sequence is a mixture of just about all facets of filmmaking. It was a miniature river set environment for some of the close-ups. A lot of it was shot over a series of weeks. Live action plays where you have actual waterfalls with barrels in them, waterfalls by themselves, barrels with markers, and then a ton of digital effects on top of it. We built 76 water simulations for those shots over the span of the entire thing. It's about 700 kilometers of river that we created, and pushing about 20 tons of water per second of film through those simulations. And so those are guys that work on that. It takes them about a year to work through all of those simulations. And they use software and settings, and they actually rewrote a lot of our simulation software to get it to a place where it can handle that volume. Same with fire here. Obviously, a lot of fire was flawed. No real fire in the film. Everything you see there was digital as well. Obviously, coming from a giant dragon, that's the easiest way to do it. The last is environments. All 4 of the environments here are primarily digital. So the Laketown environment, there was a large practical set that was built for any time anybody was here. It was practical. At any time there was interaction with the primary actors, usually like touching walls, doors, and things like that. That would be live action. Everything else you saw was either added to it or in some cases, or most cases, entirely digital. The scene up in the top left there, you can't really tell it was blind, being establishing shots were all digital as well as Doldergur is represented here, Thranduil's Realm, and then the waterfall entrance area. So these make up the core components of what visual effects is. They sort of fall into these 3 primary categories. There's a ton of other things. There's invisible effects, the things that you don't see very much, like set extension, whatever. But when you talk about visual effects, these are the primary areas. And when we talk about building a visual effects business, WETA Digital in particular was, the visual effects business, particularly now, is it's a global business. It is not a worldwide business in the fact that there isn't visual effects everywhere, but visual effects happen everywhere, and all productions around the world split out their visual effects to vendors and studios across the world. So when you're competing for that work, or when you're thinking about getting involved in a project, those productions are going out across to any possible vendor that they can access. And so when you're competing from that standpoint, you're not just competing locally, you're really competing with everybody else that can do the same work that you can do. And so it's really a selling WETA on a truly global scale. It's saying this little place in Wellington, New Zealand is going to generate all of this work for you. And it's trying to get that name out there for people, which is a lot easier now than it was, but originally it was kind of a big challenge for people to believe that they could get to that point where all of their work could be created in New Zealand and all of the visual effects could be done. And it's entirely possible that the visual effects supervisor on the studio side, and even the director, would never even make it to New Zealand, and all that work would just be done without them being there physically, which is possible now, and actually likely. This is the thing that I mentioned earlier. The important thing to remember when you're talking about this business is that the visual effects business is a service business in the same way that waiters and plumbers and business strategists and advertising executives and a whole host of other people, it is a service business. We do not own the work that we do. We are contracted to provide a service. We put a bid together in terms of we scope the work. We say this is how much it's going to cost and here's when we can deliver it to you. In a little more detail than that, but that's pretty much how it runs. And those bids are then submitted back to the production, and then there's back and forth and haggling and discussion. And then we agree on what the price is for a given scope of work, and they either select us or somebody else. So there is not a profit sharing. So despite the fact that we did the majority, probably 80% of Avatar was entirely digital. Everything on Pandora, everything with Blue People, was done by WETA, and it was the largest selling film of all time. That made absolutely no difference to how much we were paid for the work on that film. Now, on the other side, if that film had tanked and lost $400 million, that also would not have affected how much we got paid on the film. So like any service business, it is a sort of risk-reward thing. But when you're thinking about this as a creative enterprise and as a business, and building that business, it's really important to remember that it is a service business rather than an owned product, which comes with its own sort of challenges. When we talk about the work, this is sort of how WETA Digital sort of grew up. It originally started with New Zealand work. I started it with Rings here in Hong. In reality, it started before that with some of Peter's early films like Bad Taste and Frighteners. Has anybody actually seen Bad Taste or Frighteners? A couple? I think there's a large segment of the population that is hoping that Peter will go back and do a splatter film just kind of for fun, for passion. I know he still enjoys them. I have no idea whether he'll actually do it, but everywhere I go, people always ask because it's one of those things. It's where his career started, and those films have a sort of cult following amongst a number of people. But the story of WETA really starts with Lord of the Rings and sort of the scale that's built